Hello and welcome to Varsity Blue. Alex Prasad alongside only Scott Wagner right now. And of course, a rather tempestuous day outside. A little chilly, but there's not been a greater day to be a Michigan Wolverine, at least in the last 2 years, the 2 years that I've produced this show.
I suppose. I mean, I'd still take the feeling after the Notre Dame game to the feeling after beating Indiana in a nail-biting fashion. But hey, we're 4-0. That's the bottom line. So well, Michigan's moving along.
After 3-9, I deem it impolite to complain about 4-0, no matter how ugly it is.
Fair enough.
But before we get to the Indiana game, we have to first take care of another game that started ugly, ended nice. That was the Eastern Michigan game. Michigan ended up winning that 45-17. And the first concerning thing about this game, Scott, was the defense. 148 rushing yards given up in the first half. Now they tightened up in the second half, of course, against a former Michigan defensive coordinator, Ron English. Mm-hmm. But what did that game tell us about the Michigan defense?
Well, I mean, I think it just tells us that the Michigan defense still has a lot of kinks to work out, especially, because with this new system coming in, with Greg Robinson coming as defensive coordinator, I personally had concerns as far as whether or not the defensive line would be big enough and whether we'd be able to get penetration. And against Eastern Michigan, you saw, Alex, that this defensive line just wasn't quite big enough, and the offensive line of Eastern Michigan was opening holes up, and that gave Michigan a lot of problems, especially in the first half.
Well, exactly, and take a look at some of these stats. Usually, this game is completely one-sided, all 4 quarters, not just the last 2. But Michigan 9-0 all time against Eastern Michigan, won by a combined score of almost 300 points to 50 points. Of course, 17 of those came in the first half against Michigan. And take a look at the final stats. The most shocking 40 minutes time of possession for the Eastern Michigan Eagles. Why they're not the Emus, no one will ever know. It's a travesty. Only 20 minutes time of possession for Michigan. And today at the press conference, Obi Eze mentioned that, he likes playing a lot and it doesn't really bother him that the offense is not out as much. But perhaps that's not true. Perhaps maybe he likes it, but it's not as good for the defense's effectiveness. But there were other things to be perhaps a little bit concerned about now that we're real Michigan fans and not living in fantasy 3-9 land. And that would be, first, Tate Forcier, for the first time. He looked a little bit like a freshman at times in that game.
Tate Forcier struggled, but like you said, he is a freshman. People are getting, I think, a little too carried away with how good Tate Forcier is. He's still a freshman. He's not going to win the Heisman this year. He's a very good quarterback, but he's still prone to make mistakes. He is only 18, 19 years old.
Younger than I am. That's sad. Anyway, I should be a Division I quarterback. Got to go back and be a Steve Sarkisian as my personal mentor from age 2. All right, and then finally, one interesting thing is Carlos Brown had a huge game, almost 200 yards rushing on only 13 carries. Brandon Miner, again, a little banged up, and since it was Eastern Michigan, didn't play a lot. Is Brandon Miner no longer Michigan's featured back?
Alex, Brandon Miner is still the best back on the Michigan football team. Carlos Brown had a fantastic run against Eastern Michigan, a 90-yard touchdown run. He's very explosive. He can hit the holes, but Brandon Miner can hit the holes, has speed, and he can run over people. And when you're playing Penn State and you're playing Ohio State, Carlos Brown is not going to be able to run through those big defensive linemen and linebackers. So that's when Brandon Miner is really going to shine, I think. So Carlos Brown's been good of late, but Brandon Miner is still the featured back in this offense.
I think the template for that is the Penn State game last year, at least the first half, where Brandon Miner just plowed through, linebacker U's, prestigious linebackers, and still broke away for a couple longer runs as well. Carlos Brown, I don't see that happening. But I suppose Michigan's fortunate to have 2 guys, both injury-prone, but at least so far, seems like they're staggered well enough that Michigan can survive. Now, of course, Eastern was 2 weeks ago. Swine flu ravaged our cast. Well, not swine flu, but we'll blame it on that. But, of course, Indiana was this past weekend. That was a little bit of an adventure. Let's take a look at the highlights. Michigan eked out a win in this one, and right off the bat, you see poor tackling from that Michigan defense. And, of course, that's been a theme all year long, all decade long for Michigan. But here, Indiana on 4th and 2 at the Michigan 40 decides, hey, what do we have to lose? We're Indiana. Goes for it, and then Darius Willis right there takes the pitch, takes it to the house. Jordan Kovacs at safety. He is a walk-on. 7-0 Indiana, but Michigan comes right back. Carlos Brown on this screen pass, 61 yards for the touchdown, makes it 7-7, and it looks like things are, going well for Michigan. All right, one little snafu, nothing wrong's happened. Carlos Brown again, this time for 41 yards on the ground, 14-7 Michigan. But Bubakar Sissoko, beaten deep. Go figure. Actually, he was benched in this game, did not play the rest of the game because he gave up that long pass, and right there, Indiana finishes off the drive, ties it back up at 14 at the end of the first quarter. But Michigan's offense, too, was struggling early. Here's Tate trying to make something out of nothing. He would pay for that with an intentional grounding penalty. Actually, no, they ruled him down, but it would have been intentional grounding. Again, sack. Indiana comes back, and this option was a little tricky little wrinkle, and that Michigan defense just could not stop Indiana in the first half. But until they got to the red zone, that is. Here, another field goal from Indiana, 17-14. They would kick 4 more, and Tate Forcier, here a freshman mistake. He's trying to get rid of the ball when he was under pressure, coughs it up, and a defensive lineman intercepts it, leads to another Indiana field goal. There's Denard Robinson throwing the ball not to the other team. Kevin Coger with a catch, 36 yards, and then Denard doing what he does best, coming up just now, running up the middle, held on to it that time, foreshadowing a little bit later, and then minor rage right up the middle, just like we were talking about, Scott. Michigan goes on top 21-20 late in the first half. But Denard Robinson fumbles the ball, Indiana gets it back late, and it's going to lead, of course, those little in routes, killing Michigan's defense, and it's going to lead to another field goal, 23-21 at the end of the first half. At the start of the second half, same story. Ben Chappell looked like an all-pro quarterback, and it kept leading to more field goals, 26-21 at this point in the game. And then also, because of David Molk's broken foot, and we're going to talk about this, David Moosman had to move over to center. Some bad snaps that really cost the Michigan offense. This time it doesn't, though. Indiana misses that field goal, and as you'll see, it ended up being a crucial point in the game. Into the fourth quarter now, Carlos Brown decided, hey, I'm just going to take over again, just like I did in the first. Tate Forcier, 3rd and long completion there to Kelvin Grady, and Michigan started to heat things up. Forcier, this time, gives it off to Brown again up the middle, and Michigan rediscovers its running game. Now Tate, play-action bootleg, reminds me a little bit of Brian Griese until you see Tate Forcier's tremendous ups. I don't know what the hang time on that was, but he got up there. Perhaps a little reckless, though, Scott.
A little reckless. When I saw him jumping in the air, why do you have to do that, Tate? If he just jumps right underneath there, he'd probably be okay, but he wanted to go over the top. Hey, you can't argue with the results. So.
Well, on that shot, it looked like his hang time was like 4 or 5 seconds.
That's amazing. Slow motion.
All right, then Tate Forcier, says jumping over everyone works once is going to work twice, and it does, actually. I mean, pinball Forcier in the air, take another look. He's hit 2 or 3 times, got pushed by his own offensive players into the end zone. Michigan takes the lead, perhaps for good.